All right, Kate Dugan, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
So the first thing I'd like to, before we get into the property assessments, the first thing I'd like to talk about is CLS in general. What is CLS and how do you help people?
So CLS represents low-income Philadelphians in a variety of civil legal matters. Specifically, the unit I work in is called the Homeownership and Consumer Rights Unit. We represent people in mortgage foreclosure, tax foreclosure, tangled titles, all sorts of home ownership and consumer issues, but there are a lot of other units at CLS who provide a wide range of civil legal services.
And what specifically is your role?
So I am a member of the property tax team. So a big bulk of the work I do has to do with property taxes, helping people enroll in programs, defending property tax foreclosures. But I do also handle mortgage foreclosure and tangled title cases as well.
Oh, okay. So those are a lot of things that we hear a lot about lately that people are having issues with.
Yeah, and a lot of them overlap. Often somebody will have a property tax problem that's overlapping with a tangled title problem. So we do a lot of coordination between legal problems.
Okay. So let's get into the assessments a little bit then. So property assessments came out a week or two ago, and there's been a lot of concern about this. The first thing I'd like to talk to you a little bit about is the process itself. Do you have any concerns about how the assessment process was undertaken?
So what we know right now is that the city moved to a new process of assessing properties. We don't yet know a whole lot about that process. So I would say in terms of having concerns about that process specifically, it might be a little too early. We're hopeful that the city and the OPA will release information that helps us figure out if there should be things we are worried about. Suffice it to say that the city controller released a map a couple of weeks ago that showed where the biggest increases in property tax assessments were. And we are certainly concerned that those huge increases are happening in low-income Black and brown neighborhoods. A lot of the areas around Temple, in Strawberry Mansion, places like that, residents, longtime low-income residents are really seeing huge tax increases. So we are concerned, if not about the process, about the impact it's going to have on people.
Sure. And I'm not sure if you can answer this question. Maybe nobody can because we're not at a point where we know enough yet. But in 2018, City Council commissioned an audit of OPA's processes and procedures, and it found that they were below industry standard in certain categories. Maybe we don't know, but do you have any indication that positive changes have occurred since then to help in the process?
So I think given that the change really happened in the past couple of weeks, because remember, the city did not do big reassessments during the pandemic. So it's been a couple of years. So I think it's a little early to say, and we're certainly digging into that information. And I know the OPA has explained that their new model of assessing properties is within industry standards. So.
And they had commissioned a report, I believe, last year that indicated that was the fact, that they believe that they're at that level now.
That's their position right now, yes.
Yeah. So has your department been getting a lot of calls about this from concerned citizens?
So we are getting some calls. The thing I'm worried about is that a lot of people don't know that this is an issue yet. You may have heard during city council hearings that the OPA, while it has released these assessments, it is not mailing out those envelopes that tell people what their assessments are until possibly September. So, whereas on May 9th, I was sitting on the computer refreshing, to see what my own property's assessed value was going to be, somebody without internet access, seniors, people who are limited English proficient may not even know that their properties are doubling in value next year. And given the deadlines to enroll in programs and to appeal assessments, right now we are mostly working on outreach to let people know that they may need to call us.
Yeah, and that's doubly concerning because the opportunities to appeal come pretty quickly after, if that notice goes out in September, I believe it's in October.
It's currently in October. The city would have the power to extend that, and the OPA has indicated that, we'll see when the assessments go out, and then they can adjust the deadline accordingly for that first level review.
Yeah, and just it almost sounds like silliness, but it's true that they spoke about an envelope shortage,
Yes.
and they're not certain how that's going to play into this. I mean, I would just call the water department and say, hey, could you put these in your bills? But I mean, there's, that's another issue. There's all kinds of concerns here. So the people who have contacted you so far, what kinds of things have you been telling them?
So something that we always do whenever people contact us, even before these assessments, is walk through and make sure people are in all the property tax relief programs they qualify for. So if they are a senior, they may qualify for the senior freeze. If they're a longtime owner, they may qualify for the longtime owner occupant program. We really just want to make sure that people are accessing the existing city programs to insulate them against these spikes later in 2023 and beyond. So, we're helping people think through, is it worth appealing your assessment? But I think at this point right now, we really are just trying to make sure people are insulated against these increases.
And then as we talk, maybe long term, and when I say long term, I mean maybe now until the end of the year, is there any other recourse that citizens have in order to challenge this process or to in any other way mitigate the expenses they'll be incurring?
So there are, somebody who thinks their assessment is incorrect should certainly consider appealing, and they should do that as soon as possible and make sure that they're in all those tax programs that they qualify for. And I mean, other than that, we know that City Council has already introduced a bill to increase the homestead exemption. That was something announced by the mayor pretty early on. So, just calling your council person saying this would really help me and I support this. Watching the news to see what kind of tax relief programs unfold over the next few months will be important.
Yeah. So I have a couple other questions here, and I'm going to preface them by saying I'm not an attorney, which I always say when I ask legal questions. But I have these two questions that have been kind of rolling around in my head since, last week or so. So the city has said that they're going to release the information explaining how the assessments were calculated. If they don't, or if they only release a portion of it, could property owners have some kind of legal recourse to say, well, I don't know how this occurred. I don't know how you got to this number.
So I think the technical answer to that is if a property owner thinks their assessment is incorrect, whatever the method, they have the right to appeal. So it's certainly possible that the OPA's methods have, for certain properties, led to inaccurate assessments. But what property owners need to be focusing on now is, A, do I think my assessment is accurate, whatever the method? And B, what can I do to mitigate the effects of that assessment if it's accurate, or when it gets changed, it's still going to be a bigger tax bill. So I think it's less about the methods you get to and more about, looking, is it worth appealing?
And perhaps inspired by the revolutionary sensibilities of Memorial Day weekend coming up, my last question here is, because these assessments occur under the oversight of the administration without really council input, could this be considered an example of taxation without representation?
So the OPA is tasked with performing accurate assessments. It is not tasked with setting the tax rate. It's not tasked with doing property tax relief programs. That's the stuff that's within the the umbrella of council to do. But remember, OPA is not setting the tax rate. All they are supposed to be doing is saying, how much is this house worth for tax purposes? So I that's probably like a pretty fine distinction. But if the question is this, is this taxation in an undemocratic way? I think the important thing to remember is there's aspects of taxation that have nothing to do with the OPA. That they really are there to just come out with assessments as accurately as possible.
Okay. I'd like to bring Denise Clay Murray here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Hi, and thank you, Larry, and thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. You say that if folks want to, they're able to appeal their assessment if they think it's incorrect. What is the appeals process, and is there an expense to that?
Right, so there's a 2-track appeals process. And I have to say the names for these processes are misleading, and I'll explain in a second. So the formal way to appeal is to file an appeal to the Board of Revision of Taxes. That's the administrative agency that hears appeals. The deadline to do that is October 3rd, and you can do that as soon as today. So somebody who can go on the internet, figure out what their tax assessment is, say, hey, I think that's wrong. They can file an appeal today to the Board of Revision of Taxes. There's also something called a first level review. And this is why it's misleading. It is not a prerequisite to filing a Board of Revision of Taxes appeal. It is not a first level, and then the second level is the BRT. It is simply an informal appeals process to the OPA itself to say, hey, I think you got it wrong. That is the thing that you have to wait till you get those mailed envelopes for. So right now, if somebody thinks their assessment is incorrect, they should file that formal BRT appeal and watch the mail for their assessment envelope. They can also choose to file the first level review. As to whether there are expenses, it doesn't cost money to actually file. Some people do choose to get an appraisal of their property if they think an appraisal would show that the market value of their property is too low. Appraisals are not free, but it is also not something that you absolutely must include with your appeal. Some people also hire lawyers to represent them during their appeals, but again, the BRT does not require you to have a lawyer, so you can choose whether or not to do that.
Does community legal services provide that kind of legal assistance to people?
So on the tax team, we do occasional assessment appeals. It is not the bulk of our work. A lot of the work we do is defending people who are at risk of losing their homes to property tax foreclosure. But I do have some colleagues who have done assessment appeals. So it's something we would, potentially take on, but not, I would say at this point, right now, not the core of our work.
Now, you mentioned that you all also handle helping people who are about to lose their home. Have people called you up concerned about an increase in that due to these assessments?
Yeah, so I think that's not something we're going to see this month or next month, but I certainly think that if people starting next year can't afford their property tax bills, there is certainly a risk of people losing their homes either to property tax foreclosure or to mortgage foreclosure if they can't afford their increased mortgage payments as a result of a tax increase. So it's something we're concerned about, but it's something that we think will happen probably, not immediately.
Now, you also mentioned some of the programs that the city has to provide mitigation in these instances. Now, a lot of people, and it's odd to me because a lot of these programs have been around for a while, still don't know that they have access to them and what they can use. What can be done to change that? Is it like a function of people from the Loop program, for example, getting on television and doing more advertisements? How do we bring up the knowledge level here?
That's a really great question. So CLS does outreaches at all sorts of events with council members, state reps, state senators, senior senators, just to try to get the word out. And I know the Department of Revenue does that too. They have a unit devoted to outreach. I know one of the things on the table, I think with Mayor Keddy's proposal, is increased resources to help revenue do outreach. And it's also a matter of if somebody applies for one tax program, if they're an owner occupant, we certainly advocate for revenue screening them for any other programs. For example, if you get into an owner occupied payment agreement for delinquent taxes, the Department of Revenue will now screen you and put you in the homestead exemption if you're in an agreement, because the Venn diagram of what you need for those things is a circle. So just using systems to kind of screen people and identify them, as opposed to just putting ads out there that people may or may not see.
Okay. Now, in terms if someone wanted to contact you to get more information about all of this stuff, because I'm sure that right now there's a 80-something-year-old woman who's lived in her house since her husband bought it for her in World War II, that's looking at her assessment and thinking, okay, this is the time where they're going to come and get my house. I need help. How would they connect with you?
So there are a couple ways to do that. A great way to connect with all sorts of legal and housing counseling help is to call the Save Your Home Philly hotline, which is 215-334-4663. That is a city-funded hotline run out of our sister organization, Philadelphia Legal Assistance. And some problems do not require a lawyer. As a lawyer, I'm happy to say that, you don't need me for everything. If you call and, identify as I'm a senior, I really think I need to be in the freeze, I'm worried about my taxes are going up. The hotline can connect you with a free housing counselor to help you do that. And, housing counselors are able to loop in CLS if something gets complicated or they identify a legal problem. So I would say if anybody is worried or they just want to know, like, is there a program I qualify for? The Save Your Home Philly hotline is a really great resource.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to Larry McGlynn, my co-host.
Thanks, Denise. Kate, thank you so much for joining us and walking us through this. As the process goes on, we hope we can have you back to talk more about this once we kind of know what's going to happen. But thank you so much for joining us.
Of course.